The laughter reached her before the sight did. Sauvé paused at the top of the servants' staircase, her hand frozen on the cold stone wall, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. She knew that laugh, low, intimate, meant for shadows and secrets. She had heard it once, years ago, when Aldrich had still pretended to court her. Before the wedding? Before the silence settled between them like a third presence in every room. She should turn back. She should return to her chambers, where the fire had gone cold, and her lady's maid had long since been dismissed for the evening. She should pretend she had heard nothing, seen nothing, felt nothing. That was what a proper duchess did. That was what she had done for 3 years now. But something pulled her forward, some treacherous instinct that whispered tonight would be different. Tonight, she would finally see with clarity what she had spent years refusing to acknowledge. The corridor stretched before her, dimly lit by guttering candles that cast jumping shadows on the silk-papered walls of Stormwick Hall. Music drifted up from the ballroom 2 floors below, where 300 guests celebrated the Duke of Ashford's birthday with champagne and false laughter. Sauvé had excused herself an hour ago, pleading a headache that no one cared enough to question. The sound came from the blue drawing room, her drawing room, the one she had redecorated herself, choosing the damask curtains and the French settee and the portrait of her mother that hung above the fireplace. She pushed the door open without knocking. The scene arranged itself before her like a painting of betrayal. Aldrich sat on her settee, his dark hair disheveled, his cravat loosened, a glass of brandy dangling from his fingers, and draped across him like a living ornament was Ottilie Vansford, the widowed Countess of Belmore, her auburn hair tumbling from its pins, her lips swollen, and her bodice significantly looser than decency allowed. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Aldrich looked up, and Sauvé watched his expression shift through surprise, irritation, and finally something that made her stomach turn to ice: indifference. He did not push Ottilie away. He did not stand. He did not offer excuses or apologies, or even the pretense of shame. He simply raised one dark eyebrow, as if Sauvé were a servant who had interrupted at an inconvenient moment. "Was there something you needed?" His voice carried the faint boredom of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Ottilie laughed, high and brittle, not bothering to adjust her dress. "Oh dear, the little Duchess has lost her way. I was looking for you." Sauvé heard her own voice, as if from a great distance, steady and hollow. "Your grandmother is asking for you downstairs." "Then tell her I'm occupied." Occupied. That was all she warranted, a single word of dismissal. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of silent dinners and separate bedrooms and polite smiles in public, and she did not even merit the courtesy of a lie. She had known about the affairs. One did not survive as Duchess of Ashford without learning which whispers to ignore and which servants could be trusted with secrets. She knew about the opera singer in London, the merchant's daughter in Bristol, the countless others whose names she had never learned because learning them would make them real. But this was different. This was her drawing room, her settee, her mother's portrait watching from above as her husband entertained his mistress beneath it. "Sauvé," Aldrich's voice sharpened with impatience. "Close the door. You're letting in a draft." She looked at him then, truly looked, perhaps for the first time since their wedding day. He was handsome still. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes the color of winter storms. But there was something rotten beneath the beauty, something spoiled and cruel that she had spent years pretending not to see. He thought she would close the door. He thought she would retreat to her chambers and weep into her pillow and appear at breakfast tomorrow with her composure intact. He thought she would endure this as she had endured everything else, because that was what wives did, because she had nowhere else to go, because he was a duke, and she was merely the daughter of a baron whose debts had been paid in exchange for her hand. She had been bought, and bought, things did not leave. Of course, Sauvé said quietly. Forgive the intrusion. She closed the door with a soft click. Then she stood alone in the darkened corridor, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short gasps, while the sound of Ottilia's laughter leaked through the walls like poison. 3 years. 3 years of being invisible. 3 years of being tolerated rather than loved, displayed rather than cherished, used rather than wanted. And now there was something else. Something she had confirmed only this morning with the discreet doctor from the village. Something that changed everything. Sauvé pressed her palm flat against her stomach, against the secret growing beneath her ribs. Aldrich did not know about the child. No one knew. She had hidden the symptoms carefully, dismissed her lady's maid's concerns with vague excuses about rich food and seasonal ailments. This child would be the heir to Ashford, the future duke or duchess, the prize that Aldrich's grandmother had been demanding since the wedding night, the entire purpose for which Sauvé had been purchased and installed in this gilded prison. If she told him, she would never be free. She would become even more invisible, reduced to nothing but a vessel for his dynasty. The child would be taken from her the moment it drew breath, raised by nurses and tutors and the iron-willed dowager, while Sauvé faded into the wallpaper like every Ashford bride before her. She could not let that happen. She would not let that happen. Sauvé walked back to her chambers on numb legs, her mind spinning with impossible calculations. She had no money of her own, no connections who would risk the Duke's wrath to help her. But she had time, a few months before her condition became impossible to hide, a few months to plan something that duchesses did not do, something that would scandalize all of England. She reached her bedroom and locked the door behind her, leaning against it, as the weight of her decision settled onto her shoulders. She was going to disappear, and she was taking his heir with her. 3 years earlier, Sauvé Beckworth had believed in fairy tales. She had been 19, standing in her father's crumbling study, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light, while Baron Beckworth explained that she was to be married. The words had washed over her in fragments. Duke of Ashford, ancient title, considerable fortune. She had not asked why a duke would want the daughter of an impoverished baron whose estate was mortgaged to the rafters. She had simply nodded, because that was what daughters did, because her father's hands had trembled when he spoke, because she understood without being told that this marriage was not a choice, but a rescue. The Beckworth debts would be paid. Her younger brother would keep his commission in the Navy. All it would cost was Sauvé herself. The marriage contract had been negotiated in a single afternoon. Her father had not asked if she was willing. Her opinion had not mattered. She was the eldest daughter of a failing house, and her beauty was the only currency they had left to trade. She had looked at Aldrich Vane during their single meeting before the wedding and seen a handsome face, an elegant manner. She had imagined that courtesy could grow into affection, that she could make herself indispensable through devotion and patience. She had been a fool. The first sign had come on their wedding night, when Aldrich had visited her chamber with the businesslike efficiency of a man completing a transaction. He had not spoken. He had not looked at her face. He had done what was necessary and left before she could gather the words to say anything at all. She had told herself it would be different once they were married, that the cold formality of their courtship would thaw into something warmer, that Aldrich's distant manner was simply shyness, or the reserve of a man who had been raised to hide his feelings. She had been so desperately naive. Months passed, and Aldrich remained a stranger who shared her surname but nothing else. He spent weeks in London while she managed his country estate alone. When they occupied the same room, he looked through her as if she were furniture he had long since stopped noticing. She had tried everything, learning his favorite dishes, studying the political issues he cared about. dressing in colors she knew flattered her. Nothing worked. Nothing penetrated the wall of indifference he had constructed between them. And then she had begun to hear the whispers. There was a woman in London, an actress with red hair, who had been seen leaving the Duke's townhouse at dawn. A widow in Bath who received expensive gifts. The daughter of a shipping merchant, barely 18 years old, who had wept when the Duke ended their arrangement. Each revelation had cut a little deeper, but she had not confronted him. She had simply absorbed the knowledge and told herself that this was marriage, that this was what wives endured. The Dowager Duchess had reinforced this lesson at every opportunity. Aldrich's grandmother was a formidable woman of 73 who ruled Stormwick Hall with an iron will and a tongue that could draw blood. She had never approved of Sauvé. "Your only purpose," the Dowager had told her on the morning after the wedding, "is to produce an heir. Do that, and you will be tolerated. Fail, and you will be forgotten. Remember your place, girl." Sauvé had remembered. For 3 years, she had remembered. But the child changed everything. She had suspected for weeks, but the doctor had confirmed it just that morning. 8 weeks along. A winter baby, if all went well. The heir that Ashford had been waiting for. If she told Aldrich, he would be pleased only because an heir meant his duty was discharged. Then he would return to his mistresses while the Dowager took control of the nursery. She had accepted this fate for herself, but she would not accept it for her child. That evening, at the ball she had organized to celebrate her husband's birthday, Sauvé circulated through the crowd with her practiced smile firmly in place, while behind her eyes she catalogued everything she would need to escape. Then she had gone looking for Aldrich, and found him with Ottilie Vansford on her settee, beneath her mother's portrait, in her drawing room. Now, alone in her bedchamber with the sounds of the ball still drifting up from below, Sauvé understood what she had to do. She meant nothing to him. She never had. But this child would mean something. This child would know love and warmth and laughter. She pulled open her jewelry case and examined its contents with new eyes. The diamonds and sapphires would be missed immediately. But there were other pieces, smaller items from distant relatives that no one would remember. She began to make a list. She had perhaps 3 months before her condition became visible. 3 months to convert what she could into money. 3 months to become someone new. Sauvé was still calculating when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, unsteady footsteps that paused before her threshold. Aldrich, drunk from the sound of it. She closed the jewelry case silently and composed her features into the blank mask she had perfected over 3 years. The footsteps moved on. He had changed his mind, or perhaps he had forgotten which door was hers. Either way, she was alone, and she was planning something that would destroy them both. For the first time in 3 years, Sauvé smiled. The next 6 weeks were an exercise in calculated deception. Sauvé moved through her days as she always had, overseeing the household, hosting the required social obligations, nodding politely when the Dowager criticized her taste in table linens or the paleness of her complexion. Nothing in her manner suggested anything had changed. She was the same quiet, compliant duchess she had always been. But beneath the surface, she was dismantling her life piece by piece. The smaller jewelry went first, a garnet brooch from a cousin she had never met, emerald earrings given by Aldrich's aunt on her first Christmas at Stormwick, a gold locket that had arrived without a card and been forgotten in a drawer for years. She sold them through Brinley, her lady's maid, the only servant in the house she trusted even marginally. Brinley was a sharp-eyed woman of 40 who had served at Stormwick since her girlhood and had witnessed enough Ashford scandals to fill several novels. "It's not as much as they're worth," Brinley said quietly, pressing the purse into Sauvé's palm. "But the jeweler knows not to ask questions, and he pays in cash." Thank you, Brinley. You're in trouble. It was not a question. I'm leaving. Soon. I need money, and I need no one to know. Brinley was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. My sister has a cottage in Renford, 2 days' journey north near the coast. She takes in lodgers sometimes, women who need to disappear for a while. She doesn't ask questions either. Why are you helping me? Because I've watched you fade these past 3 years. Because no one deserves what they've done to you in this house. And because that child you're carrying deserves better than to be raised by wolves. Sauve's hand flew to her stomach. You know, I've dressed you every morning for 3 years, my lady. I know your body better than you do. You need to leave soon. Another month, and the Dowager will notice, and then nothing will save you. Brinley described the route to Renford, a crossroads marked by an ancient oak, a church with a broken steeple, a lane that wound down to the sea cliffs. Her name is Fenella. Tell her Brinley sent you. Each night after the household had gone to bed, Sauve would count her coins by candlelight. She kept a mental tally of everything she had sold, everything she still needed. She calculated how far the money would take her, how long it would last. The mathematics of escape were brutal. A coach ticket cost more than she had expected. Lodging would eat through her savings quickly. And she would need money for the baby, for clothes and supplies, and the services of a midwife. She worked through the numbers again and again, looking for ways to make them stretch further. She practiced living on less, taking smaller portions at meals, walking instead of calling for a carriage. She studied maps of the northern counties, memorizing roads and towns, calculating distances. The days blurred together in a haze of planning and performance. She continued to sell jewelry, hiding the growing collection of coins in a false bottom she had discovered in her traveling trunk. She packed clothing that would not be missed, sturdy practical garments that a widow of modest means might wear. At night, she lay awake imagining everything that could go wrong. The coach that might be stopped by highwaymen, the innkeeper who might recognize her face from some portrait, the investigator who might follow her trail and drag her back before she ever reached safety. But beneath the fear, there was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. She was doing something. After 3 years of passivity, of accepting her fate, she was taking action. She was refusing to be a victim any longer. The confrontation came 3 days before she planned to leave. Sauve was in the morning room, reviewing menus with the cook, when Aldrich appeared in the doorway. He was dressed for riding, boots gleaming, crop tapping against his thigh. I need you in London next week. The Hartwell dinner. Grandmother insists we present a united front. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Aldrich's eyebrow rose. It was the first time she had refused him anything. I beg your pardon? I've been unwell. The doctor has recommended rest and country air. You look perfectly healthy to me. Appearances can be deceiving, my lord. I'm sure you of all people understand that. The barb landed. She saw it in the slight tightening around his eyes. His hand closed around her wrist, pulling her to her feet. You forget yourself. You are my wife. You go where I tell you to go. I am your wife in name only. You made that clear from our wedding night. You have never wanted me for anything but the dowry my father could not afford, and the heir your grandmother demands. So do not pretend that my presence matters to you, my lord. We both know it doesn't. Something flickered in his expression. You've changed. Something has changed. Nothing has changed. I've simply stopped performing for an audience that isn't watching. He released her wrist. Very well. Stay here and rest. But when I return, we will discuss this new attitude of yours at length. And Sauve, whatever game you think you're playing, remember who holds the cards. You have nothing. No family who will take you in. no fortune to support yourself, no reputation that would survive leaving me. You are Duchess of Ashford, because I allow it. Never forget that." He left without waiting for a response. That night, Sauvé made her final preparations. The trunk was packed. The coins were counted and recounted. The route to Renford was memorized. She left a note on her pillow, weighted down with her wedding ring. "You should have looked closer." At midnight, she crept through the servants' corridors and out through the kitchen entrance, her trunk carried by Brinley, who had insisted on seeing her safely to the road. "Live well," Brinley whispered fiercely. "Raise that child far from this cursed place. That's thanks enough." They embraced briefly. Then Sauvé turned and walked into the darkness. What she did not see was the figure watching from the upper window of the east wing. The Dowager Duchess stood very still, her hand pressed to the glass, her eyes tracking the two shapes moving down the lane until they disappeared into the night. She did not call out. She did not raise an alarm. She simply watched and smiled. The journey to Renford took 3 days, and each mile stripped away another layer of the woman Sauvé had been. She traveled by mail coach for the first leg, wedged between a sleeping merchant and a mother with 2 restless children. The seats were hard, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and damp wool. Every stop brought the terror of being recognized, of someone looking too closely at the pale woman in the modest traveling dress who kept her face turned toward the window. But no one looked. No one gave her a second glance. They saw what she wanted them to see. A widow, perhaps, traveling to stay with relatives. A governess on her way to a new position. For the first time in 3 years, her invisibility was a gift. The coach stopped at posting inns, where she ate meals she barely tasted, and slept in narrow beds that smelled of other travelers. She paid in small coins, counting each one carefully, watching her reserves dwindle with each passing mile. The second day, she transferred to a smaller coach, heading north along the coast road. The passengers here were rougher, working people with calloused hands who spoke in accents she had to strain to understand. They shared food with each other, passing around loaves of bread and wedges of cheese, and someone offered her a portion without asking anything in return. She almost wept at the kindness. It was so different from the cold politeness of the drawing rooms she had left behind, where every courtesy came with calculation attached. By the 3rd day, she was traveling alone in a farmer's cart, having paid the last of her smaller coins for passage. The farmer was an elderly man named Corwin, who asked no questions, and seemed content to let the silence stretch between them. The landscape had changed. The gentle rolling hills of Ashford had given way to windswept moors and rocky outcroppings, and finally, the distant glitter of the sea. The air tasted different here, sharp with salt and something wild. Freedom, perhaps, or fear. They felt remarkably similar. "Renford's just over that ridge," Corwin said finally. "Fishing village mostly. Keeps to itself." "That suits me perfectly." He gave her a long look. "Running from something, are you?" "Running towards something." She touched her stomach briefly. "A new life." Corwin let her down at the edge of the village, refusing the coins she offered. "Keep your money, lass. You'll need it more than I do." Renford was smaller than she had imagined. A handful of cottages clustered around a natural harbor where fishing boats rocked at anchor. A single tavern with a weathered sign. A church with the broken steeple Brinley had described. She found the cliff path easily enough, a narrow track that wound along the headland, past wind-bent trees. The sea crashed against the cliffs below. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp in the salt air. The cottage appeared around a bend in the path, and Sauvé stopped to stare. It was small and weathered, built from local stone with a thatched roof that had seen better days. A vegetable garden struggled in the thin soil beside it. Laundry flapped on a line, It was nothing like Stormwick Hall, nothing like anything she had ever known. It was perfect. She knocked before her courage could fail her. The door swung open, and Sauvé found herself face to face with Fenella Marsh. The woman was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her face was weathered and unsmiling, her posture rigid with suspicion. "You're not from around here." It was not a question. "No, Brinley sent me. Your sister. She said you might have room for a lodger." "Brinley hasn't written in 6 months. How do I know she sent you?" "She gave me this, and she said to tell you that the oak by the crossroads still stands." Fenella took the paper, studied it, and then studied Sauvé again. "You're in trouble. Running from a husband, by the look of you. Those hands have never worked a day in their life. And you're with child, though you're trying to hide it. How did you? I've seen enough women pass through here to know the signs." Fenella stepped back from the doorway. "Come in then. But understand this. Whatever trouble follows you, I won't have it landing on my doorstep. If someone comes looking, you were never here. Agreed?" "Agreed." The cottage interior was sparse but clean. A fire burned in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across whitewashed walls. Sauvé sat by the fire, and for the first time in 3 days, allowed herself to breathe. She had made it. She was here, at the edge of the world. But even as relief washed through her, she noticed Fenella watching her with an expression that was not quite welcoming. "You can stay. But first, you're going to tell me exactly who you're running from. And don't lie. I'll know if you do." Sauvé looked into those storm-gray eyes and understood that her test was just beginning. The fire popped and hissed in the silence as Sauvé weighed her options. She could lie. She could invent a simpler story, an abusive merchant husband, a family that had cast her out. Fenella might believe it. But something in the older woman's steady gaze told her that lies would not survive long in this cottage. Fenella had spent years helping women disappear. She knew the shape of desperation. "My husband is the Duke of Ashford," Sauvé said quietly. "I left him 3 days ago. No one knows where I've gone." Fenella's expression did not change, but her hand stilled on the mending she had picked up. "A duchess. In name only. I was purchased to produce an heir. When I failed to conceive quickly enough, my husband lost what little interest he had. For 3 years, I've been invisible in my own home, while he paraded his mistresses before me, and his grandmother reminded me daily of my inadequacy. And now you're with child." "Yes, 14 weeks along, perhaps 15 now." Sauvé touched her stomach. "If I had stayed, the child would have been taken from me. Raised by nurses and tutors, taught to be cold and cruel like every Ashford before it. I would have been reduced to nothing." Fenella set down her mending. "So you ran." "I ran? With what? What resources do you have?" Sauvé withdrew the purse of coins, far lighter now after 3 days of travel. "This, and some jewelry I haven't sold yet. It's not much, but I can work. I can learn. I'm not afraid of hard labor." Fenella actually laughed at that, a short, harsh sound. "You've never scrubbed a floor in your life, girl. Look at those hands." "Then they'll toughen. I have no choice, Mrs. Marsh. I cannot go back. I will not go back. Whatever it takes to survive here, I'll do it." Fenella studied her for a long moment. Then she rose and crossed to a cupboard, withdrawing a bottle and 2 small glasses. She poured whiskey into both and pressed one into Sauvé's hands. "Drink. You look like you need it." The whiskey burned going down, but it spread warmth through Sauvé's chest. "I've helped 17 women disappear over the years," Fenella said, settling back into her chair. "Wives running from husbands who beat them. Daughters escaping fathers, who would sell them into marriage. She took a long sip of her own drink. But I've never hidden a duchess before. I'm not a duchess anymore. I'm no one. That's not how the law works, girl. You're still his property in the eyes of the world. If he finds you, he can drag you back. Have you declared mad and locked away? Take that child the moment it's born and never let you see it again. Sauve's hands tightened on the glass. He won't find me. He'll look. Men like that, powerful men, they don't accept being defied. It's not about love or even wanting you back. It's about pride, about ownership. He'll tear apart the country looking for you. What would you have me do? Go back? Accept that fate? I'd have you understand what you're facing. This isn't a game. This is survival. Every day for the rest of your life, you'll be looking over your shoulder. Every stranger could be someone sent to find you. Are you prepared for that? Sauve thought of her child growing up in that house of ice, learning to be cruel because kindness was weakness. I'm prepared. I have to be. Fenella nodded slowly. Something in her expression shifted, hardening into what might have been respect. Then we have work to do. First, you need a new name. Sauve is too unusual, too memorable, something plain, common. Marin. Marin Thatcher. A widow whose husband died at sea. You're here to start fresh. Take in sewing to support yourself. Marin. The name felt strange on Sauve's tongue, like wearing someone else's clothes, but it was a disguise she could grow into. Marin Thatcher. I can be her. You'll have to be, starting now. Fenella rose, moving to the window to peer out at the darkening sky. The villagers don't ask questions, but they notice everything. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you around. We'll establish your story. After that, you keep your head down, you work hard, and you pray that no one comes looking. Sauve stood, joining her at the window. The sea was turning dark as the sun sank toward the horizon. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You have no reason to take this risk. Fenella was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was rougher than before. I had a daughter once, 19 years old, married off to a man 3 times her age because his money would save our family's farm. He beat her, broke her arm twice, her ribs once. She came to me begging for help, and I told her to endure. Told her. That was what wives did. The older woman's jaw tightened. She hanged herself 6 months later. Sauve's breath caught. I'm so sorry. I've been helping women escape ever since. It doesn't bring her back. Nothing will bring her back. But every woman who walks away from a man who would destroy her, every child born free of that legacy, that matters. Fenella turned to face her. You matter, Marin Thatcher. That child matters. Don't make me regret helping you. I won't. They stood together in the gathering darkness, 2 women bound by secrets and survival. And somewhere, hundreds of miles to the south, a duke was about to discover that his invisible wife had vanished. 2 months passed. Sauve, who was learning to think of herself as Marin, discovered that transformation was not a single dramatic moment, but a slow accumulation of small changes. Her hands roughened from scrubbing and mending and helping Fenella with the endless work of survival. Her pale complexion weathered to something healthier under the coastal winds. The fine muscles she had never used began to strengthen as she hauled water and chopped vegetables. Her body changed in other ways, too. The swell of her stomach became impossible to hide, and she stopped trying. In Renford, a pregnant widow was unremarkable. The village women clucked sympathetically and offered advice about morning sickness and swollen ankles. Old Maeve from the tavern brought over bundles of baby clothes worn soft by generations of use. The fisherman's wife taught her to knit booties so small they looked like toys. She had never known kindness like this. casual, unstinting kindness from people who expected nothing in return. The work was hard, harder than anything Sauvé had ever done. Her back ached from scrubbing. Her hands cracked and bled in the salt air. Some days she was so exhausted she could barely climb the ladder to her sleeping loft. But there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing the results of her labor, in knowing that she had earned her place at the table. In Renford, no one cared about her title or her lineage. They cared whether she showed up when she said she would, whether she did her share of the work. Fenella proved to be a demanding teacher, but a fair one. She taught Maren to cook simple meals, to mend clothing with neat, invisible stitches, to manage a household on almost nothing. And slowly, carefully, she taught her to trust again. "You're stronger than you think," Fenella said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Most women in your position would have crumbled by now." "I don't feel strong. I feel terrified most of the time. That's what strength is, being terrified and keeping going anyway." At night, Maren lay in the narrow bed in the cottage's small loft and thought about Aldrich. Wondered if he had noticed she was gone yet. Wondered if he cared. She did not know that her questions had already been answered. 300 miles south, the Duke of Ashford was destroying his study. Books flew from shelves, crystal decanters shattered against walls. A priceless vase in the family for generations exploded into fragments. "Find her!" Aldrich's voice was barely human. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you have to do. Find her." The investigator, a lean man named Craddock, who had served the family for decades, maintained his composure with visible effort. "Your Grace, the trail is cold. The Duchess left no indication of her destination. She took almost nothing with her. People don't vanish. Someone helped her. Someone knows where she went. We've questioned the servants extensively. None of them claim any knowledge. Then question them again. Harder this time." After the investigator fled, Aldrich stood alone in the ruins of his study. He picked up the note she had left. 5 words, worn soft from handling. "You should have looked closer." What did it mean? What had he missed? She was just Sauvé, quiet, invisible Sauvé, who nodded when spoken to and never caused trouble. Except she wasn't anymore. She was gone. And her absence was driving him mad in ways he did not understand. The Dowager had been strangely calm when he told her, almost smug. She had simply nodded, said, "How unfortunate," and returned to her embroidery. And then there was Ottilie. His mistress had been thrilled by Sauvé's disappearance, already talking about annulments and remarriage. He had found her prattling unbearable, had found her entire presence unbearable, in fact, since the night of his birthday ball. The night Sauvé had opened the door to the blue drawing room and looked at him with eyes that held nothing. Not anger, not hurt, just emptiness. He had replayed that moment 1,000 times in the weeks since. The way she had stood in the doorway, perfectly still, while Ottilie draped herself across him like a trophy. The way her face had shown nothing at all, as if she had already left him long before she walked out the door. He had expected tears, accusations, a scene that would give him an excuse to dismiss her feelings as hysterical and unreasonable. Instead, she had simply looked at him and seen the truth of what he was. A coward. A fool. A man who had been handed a gift and thrown it away because he was too afraid to hold it. He had not touched Ottilie since. Could not explain why. Could not explain the hollow ache in his chest that no amount of brandy could dull. The servants whispered that he was losing his mind. They were probably right. He slept in fits and starts, waking from dreams where Sauvé stood at the end of a long corridor, always walking away, never looking back. He stopped eating regular meals. He snapped at anyone who approached him, and then felt sick with guilt. This was not grief, he told himself. He did not love her. He had never loved her. But if that was true, why did her absence feel like someone had carved out his heart with a dull blade? A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Your Grace, a message from Craddock. His men have found a lead. A jeweler in the village who purchased several pieces from a woman matching the Duchess's description." Aldrich straightened. "When?" "2 months ago, before she disappeared. She was selling jewelry, Your Grace. Preparing." She had planned this. Not an impulsive flight, but a calculated escape, executed right under his nose, while he was too busy with his mistresses to notice. "Where did the money go?" "We're investigating." "Then make him tell the truth." Aldrich moved toward the door. "She's carrying something of mine. I can feel it, and I will get it back." In Renford, Marin woke to the sound of the wind and the cry of gulls. She lay in bed for a moment, her hand resting on her stomach, where the baby had begun to move, small flutters against her palm. 6 months along now. In 3 more months, she would hold her child in her arms. Fenella was already awake, stirring porridge over the fire. There's talk in the village, strangers asking questions in towns along the coast, looking for a woman who disappeared from somewhere down south. Marin felt a chill run through her. How close? 3 villages over, working their way north, methodical, asking about anyone new who's arrived in the past few months. What do I do? Fenella crossed the room and gripped her shoulders. You stay calm. You stay invisible. If anyone comes asking, the villagers will swear you've been here for years. They protect their own. But I'm not their own. I'm an outsider. You've been here 2 months. You've worked alongside them, broken bread with them. That makes you ours. Fenella's grip tightened. Don't run again, Marin. Running now would only draw attention. We hunker down. We wait. We pray they pass us by. Marin nodded, but her hands were shaking. The Duke of Ashford did not forgive. He did not forget. And he was coming. The strangers arrived in Renford on a gray December morning. Marin saw them from the cliff path, where she had been gathering winter herbs for Fenella's remedies. 2 men on horseback, their coats too fine for this rough country, their bearing too rigid for simple travelers. They dismounted at the tavern and went inside, and she watched from a distance as the village seemed to hold its breath. She did not run. Running would draw attention. Instead, she continued her slow walk along the cliff path, her basket of herbs clutched to her chest, her pulse racing beneath her calm exterior. By the time she reached the cottage, Fenella was waiting at the door. I saw them. The older woman pulled her inside and closed the door firmly. They're asking about a woman. Dark hair, pale complexion, well born by her manner. Arrived sometime in the past 3 months. They're showing a miniature portrait. The wedding portrait. Aldrich had commissioned it the week after their marriage. Would the villagers recognize her? Her face had changed, weathered by wind and sun. Her hair was different now, pulled back in a simple braid rather than elaborate curls. But her eyes were the same. What do we do? She whispered. We wait. Old Maeve will send word if they're coming this way. In the meantime, you stay inside. Don't go near the window. The hours crawled past like years. Marin sat by the fire, her hands folded over her swelling stomach, listening to every sound outside the cottage. The wind, the gulls, the distant crash of waves. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every shadow at the window made her breath catch. She thought about the investigators, moving through Renford with their questions and their coins. She imagined them knocking on doors, showing the miniature portrait, offering money that most villagers had never seen in their lives. £50 could change a family's fortunes. It could mean a new fishing boat, or a dowry for a daughter, or medicine for a sick child. Would anyone be tempted? She had been here only a few months. She was still an outsider in many ways, still learning the rhythms and relationships of this tight-knit community. Why would they protect her when the cost of betrayal was so low and the reward so high. She thought about Aldrich, somewhere far to the south, waiting for news. What would he do when the investigators reported back? Would he come himself? Or would he send more men with more money and more authority? Would he try to take her by force, arriving in the night with armed guards and legal documents? Or would he attempt some quieter maneuver, having her declared incompetent, claiming she had lost her mind and needed to be placed under his guardianship? The law was on his side. A wife belonged to her husband in the eyes of the world. She had no rights that he was bound to respect, no recourse if he chose to drag her back to Stormwick in chains. She pressed her hand against her stomach, where the baby kicked and shifted. Whatever happened, she would not let them take her child. She would fight with everything she had. She would die before she let her daughter be raised in that house of ice. Late in the afternoon, a knock came at the door. Fenella rose slowly. She caught Marin's eye and jerked her head toward the ladder leading to the loft. Marin climbed as quietly as she could, pressing herself into the shadows, hardly daring to breathe. The door opened. Voices drifted up through the floorboards. "Good afternoon, madam. We're looking for a woman who may have passed through this area. Perhaps you've seen her." The voice was cultured, cold, and professional. Not Aldrich, one of his investigators. "A lot of women pass through here. Fishing village. People come and go. This woman is distinctive, well-born by her manner and speech. She would have arrived within the past 3 months. Young, dark-haired, quite beautiful. Don't know anyone like that." A pause. Marin pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle her ragged breathing. "Are you certain? We're prepared to pay handsomely for information. The Duke of Ashford is most anxious to locate his wife." His wife? The words hung in the air like a threat. "Duke's wife, you say?" Fenella's voice carried a note of rough amusement. "You think a duchess would hide herself in a place like Renford? We've got nothing here but fish and wind and hard work. A fine lady wouldn't last a week." The Duke believes she may have sought out remote locations precisely because they would not be searched. Then your Duke doesn't know much about remote locations. We'd notice someone like that. She'd stand out like a peacock in a henhouse. Another pause, longer this time. Marin heard footsteps moving through the small space below. "You live alone?" "I do. This cottage seems well maintained for one person, and that's a large pot of stew for a woman on her own." Marin's heart stopped. The stew, she had made it that morning, enough for 2. Such a small detail. Such a damning one. "I cook for the sick," Fenella said smoothly. "Old Maeve at the tavern has been poorly. I bring her meals when I can." "How charitable." The voice was skeptical. "We'll be staying in the village tonight. If you remember anything, we're offering £50 for information leading to the Duchess's location. £50. More money than most villagers would see in a year." "I'll keep that in mind." The door closed. Footsteps retreated down the path. Marin stayed frozen in the loft until Fenella's voice drifted up. "They're gone. For now." She descended on shaking legs. Fenella stood by the window, watching the 2 figures on horseback make their way back toward the village. "They didn't believe you." "No, but they couldn't prove anything either. They'll search the village tonight. Ask more questions, offer more money. Someone might talk. Then I should leave." "And go where? You're 6 months pregnant in December. You'd freeze before you reached the next village." Fenella gripped her shoulders. "Trust the villagers, Marin. They've protected secrets before. It's all we can do." That night, Marin lay awake, listening to every sound. The wind howling off the sea, the rattle of the shutters, the distant bark of a dog. But somewhere in the long, dark hours, something shifted inside her. She was tired of being afraid, tired of running, tired of waiting for the blow to fall. If he found her, She would not go quietly. She would fight, for herself and for her child. Dawn came gray and cold. Fenella was standing by the window when Maren descended from the loft. They're leaving, heading south, back the way they came. Maren joined her at the window. She watched the two horsemen disappear over the ridge. Is it over? For now. But they'll be back. Or others, like them. Your husband isn't going to stop searching. No, he isn't. They stood together in the pale morning light, watching the empty road. Maren understood now that safety was an illusion, that she would never be truly free as long as Aldrich drew breath. But she had survived. The village had protected her. She was stronger than she had been. Let him come, she thought. Let him find me. She was not the woman he had married anymore, and she would make him understand that one way or another. He came in February. The winter had been brutal, storms lashing the coast with freezing rain and howling winds that kept everyone huddled by their fires. Maren's belly had swelled until she could barely climb the ladder to her sleeping loft. Fenella had moved her downstairs, setting up a cot by the fire where she could rest more comfortably. The baby was due in 6 weeks. 6 weeks until she held her child. 6 weeks until everything changed again. She had stopped expecting the knock at the door. 2 months had passed since the investigators had come and gone. Other strangers had arrived in the village since then, ordinary travelers seeking shelter from storms, and each time Maren had hidden and waited and emerged unscathed. She had begun to believe she might actually be safe. The knock came just after sunset on a Tuesday evening. Fenella was in the village, delivering supplies to Maeve. Maren was alone, stirring a pot of soup on the fire, her back aching. She did not answer at first. The knock came again, more insistent. "Fenella Marsh," a voice from outside, deep and commanding. "I know she's here. Open the door." Maren's blood went cold. She knew that voice, had heard it across dinner tables and in darkened corridors, had heard it dismiss her, ignore her, reduce her to nothing with a single careless word. Aldrich. Her hand found the kitchen knife on the counter. She gripped it, though she knew it would be useless against him. But she would not go quietly. The door burst open. He stood in the threshold, rain dripping from his dark hair, his fine coat soaked and muddied from travel. He looked nothing like the polished duke she had left behind. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild, his jaw shadowed with days of stubble. He looked like a man who had been destroyed. For a moment, neither of them moved. He stared at her rough dress and weathered face and swollen belly. Emotions flashed across his features. Shock, confusion, something that might have been anguish. "You're pregnant," his voice cracked on the word. "Yes. You were pregnant when you left." "Yes." The cottage felt smaller with him in it. His presence filled the space in a way that made it hard to breathe. Even collapsed against the doorframe, even broken and exhausted, he radiated power. But there was something else now, something she had never seen in him before. Vulnerability. He stepped into the cottage, and she raised the knife. He stopped, staring at the blade in her hand, as if he could not comprehend what he was seeing. "You would threaten me with that?" "I would do whatever it takes to protect my child. Our child, Sauvé. You ran away carrying my heir. You disappeared without a word, let me believe you might be dead, and all this time you've been hiding here. I did what I had to do." "What you had to do?" His voice rose. "You are my wife, the Duchess of Ashford. You have obligations, duties, responsibilities that you abandoned." "I had no obligations." Maren's voice was steady despite her pounding heart. "I was nothing to you, less than nothing. A broodmare purchased to produce an heir, then discarded the moment you realized I wasn't entertaining enough to hold your attention." "That's not—" "Don't lie to me," She cut him off, her voice sharp. Not now. Not after everything. I spent 3 years watching you parade your mistresses through our home. 3 years of being invisible, being ignored, being reminded at every turn that I was tolerated, not wanted. You never saw me. Aldrich, you never wanted to see me. He flinched. Actually flinched, as if her words had struck him physically. I didn't know, he said quietly. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. The silence between them was absolute. Rain drummed against the roof. The fire hissed softly in the hearth. Aldrich moved to one of the chairs by the fire, collapsing into it as if his legs had given out. He buried his face in his hands, and Maren watched with something between satisfaction and bewilderment. This was not the confrontation she had imagined. She had expected rage, demands, physical force. She had not prepared for this. 3 months, he said through his fingers. I've been searching for 3 months. I've barely slept. Barely eaten. Every village, every town, every rumor. I've followed them all. He looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed. I thought you might be dead. I thought I might find your body in some ditch, frozen and alone. You would have been free. You could have married Ottilie, started fresh. Why would you care if I was dead? Because it would have been my fault. The words hung in the air like a confession. I read your note 1,000 times. You should have looked closer. I couldn't understand what it meant. And then I started remembering the dinner parties where you sat in silence while Ottilie laughed, the mornings when you avoided my eyes, the way you stopped speaking to me entirely, and I never noticed because I wasn't paying attention. You weren't paying attention because I didn't matter. You mattered. His voice broke. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. Maren stared at him, the knife still clutched in her hand. You're lying. I'm not. He met her eyes. I cared more than I wanted to, and that terrified me. So I pushed you away. Drowned it out with women who made me feel nothing. That doesn't excuse anything. No, it doesn't. He stood. I'm not here to drag you back, Sove. I came because I had to see you, had to know you were alive, had to say the things I should have said years ago. And what things are those? He took a shaking breath. That I'm sorry, that I was wrong, that you deserved so much better than what I gave you, that I love you, that I have loved you since the day we married, and I was too afraid to let myself know it. The knife clattered to the floor. The door opened behind her. Fenella stood in the threshold, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. The Duke collapsed by the fire, the Duchess with tears streaming down her face, the knife on the floor between them. Well, she said flatly, this is unexpected. 3 days passed. Aldrich did not leave. He took a room at the tavern, though the villagers treated him with barely concealed hostility. He came to the cottage each morning, sat in the chair by the fire, and waited. He did not demand anything, did not argue or threaten or try to assert his authority. He simply waited, as if he understood that he had lost the right to ask for more. Maren did not know what to do with this version of her husband. She had prepared for battle. She had steeled herself against manipulation and lies and threats. She had not prepared for a man who looked at her with haunted eyes and said nothing, asking for nothing, simply present in a way he had never been during their marriage. The days fell into a strange routine. Aldrich would arrive at the cottage in the morning, help with whatever tasks needed doing, and leave again at sunset. He chopped wood. He mended fences. He carried water from the well. He never complained. Never mentioned that his hands were blistering, that his muscles ached, that this work was beneath his station. He simply showed up, day after day, and did what needed to be done. Fenella watched the situation with narrowed eyes. He's still a duke, she said on the second evening, after Aldrich had returned to the tavern. Whatever pretty words he's spinning, he still has power over you. The law is on his side. I know. If he changes his mind, decides to drag you back by force, there's nothing we could do to stop him. I know. But you're not afraid of him anymore. Maren considered the question. The terror that had consumed her for months had faded into something more complicated. Wariness, certainly. Uncertainty. But not the blind animal fear. He's different. The man in that cottage is not the man I married. Something broke in him while he was searching for me. Men can pretend. Yes. But I don't think he's pretending. I think he's actually seeing me for the first time, and he doesn't like what he sees in himself. On the third day, Aldrich arrived at the cottage with a different demeanor. Resolved, he asked to speak with her privately, and Fenella, after a long, suspicious look, retreated to the village. They sat across from each other by the fire, the space between them charged with unspoken history. "I've been thinking," Aldrich said quietly, "about what you said, about the life you lived at Stormwick Hall. I made myself remember the things I tried not to see." "And what did you remember?" "The dinner parties, where my grandmother criticized your dress while I said nothing. The times Atili touched my arm in front of you, and I pretended not to notice. The morning after my birthday, when you looked at me like I was a stranger, and I told myself it didn't matter. It mattered. I know. What I did wasn't just neglect. It was cruelty. Systematic cruelty that I dressed up as indifference so I could pretend I wasn't responsible." Maren's hands tightened in her lap. "You were responsible. I know. And I know that no apology can undo 3 years of damage. No words can restore what I took from you." He leaned forward. "But I want you to know that I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for the chance to become someone worthy of the second chance I know I don't deserve." "What does that mean?" "It means I'll leave, if that's what you want. Go back to London. Tell everyone you died. Let you live your life in peace. You'd be legally dead. Free to remarry. Free to raise our child however you choose. Free of the Ashford name forever." The offer hung between them, enormous and impossible. "You would do that?" "I would do anything. Anything to prove that I've changed." Maren stared at him, trying to reconcile this broken man with the cold husband who had looked through her for 3 years. "Your grandmother," she said finally. "She knew I was leaving. I saw her watching from the window as I walked away. She never raised the alarm." Aldrich's expression flickered with surprise, then understanding. "She wanted you gone. She wanted the child. She knew I would never let the child be raised at Stormwick. So she let me run, hoping I would disappear forever. Then you could remarry, produce another heir." "That sounds exactly like her." Bitterness edged his voice. "If we go back, if we ever go back, she cannot be part of our daughter's life. Not as a grandmother, not as an influence, not at all." "Agreed. And the title, the estates, the inheritance. Our daughter will inherit everything. There will be no pressure for a male heir. The Ashford line has never passed through a daughter. Then it will now. Or it will end with you." He did not hesitate. "Then it will pass through her. I'll have the lawyers make it ironclad. No one will be able to take what's hers. One more thing. When we return to London, you will stand before society and acknowledge what you did. The affairs, the cruelty, all of it. You will make clear that I left because you drove me away." Aldrich paled. "That's a high price." "It's the truth. And our daughter deserves a father who can face the truth, no matter how painful." He was silent for a long moment. "Done. Whatever it takes. Whatever you need. I'll do it." Maren looked at him. She did not know if it would be enough. She did not know if the wounds would ever fully heal. but she knew that he meant it. Every word, every promise. "Stay," she said quietly. "Stay in the village until the baby is born. Let me see who you are when you're not performing for society, and then we'll decide what comes next." Hope blazed across his face. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This isn't forgiveness. It's a test. I understand." He rose, moving toward the door, but he paused at the threshold. "The note you left. You should have looked closer. I finally understand what it meant. Do you? You were right there. Everything I could have wanted, right there in front of me. And I was too blind to see it." His voice dropped. "I'm looking now, Sauvé. I see you. And you are extraordinary." The weeks that followed were unlike anything Maren had experienced. Aldrich stayed in the village, as promised. He took meals at the tavern, walked the cliff paths, and helped the fishermen repair their nets when storms damaged them. He made no demands on her time, did not push for conversations she was not ready to have. But he was present, consistently, quietly. Present in a way he had never been during their marriage. The villagers watched him with suspicion at first. A duke doing manual labor was unheard of. But Aldrich worked without complaint, his fine hands blistering and then callousing, his aristocratic bearing softening into something more human. Old Corwin began nodding to him in the mornings. Maeve at the tavern stopped spitting in his ale. The children who had hidden from him started approaching, curious about the tall stranger who chopped wood and mended fences. Maren observed all of this from a distance, trying to understand what she was seeing. "He's not what I expected," Fenella admitted one evening. "I've seen plenty of lords and their like. They come to the coast for sport sometimes, shoot birds and trample crops and leave without a backward glance. He's different. He's trying to prove something. Maybe. Or maybe he actually is different." Fenella shrugged. "People can change. Not often. But it happens." As her due date approached, Maren found herself seeking out Aldrich's company more often. They walked the cliff paths together, her hand in his arm for balance. They talked about books they had both read, about poetry, about philosophy. They walked in silence for a while one afternoon. The only sounds the crash of waves below and the cry of gulls overhead. The cliff path was familiar now, worn smooth by Maren's daily walks. "Tell me about your father," she said suddenly. "You've never talked about him." Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "He loved my mother more than anything in the world, more than his title, more than his legacy, more than me." He paused. When she died, something in him died too. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything. He wasted away over the course of a year, and then he was gone. "I'm sorry. I was 12 years old enough to understand what had happened, young enough to blame him for leaving me." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "My grandmother took over after that. She raised me to believe that love was weakness, that caring about anyone made you vulnerable, that the only safe course was to feel nothing at all. And you believed her. I believed her, because the alternative was too painful. If I admitted that I was capable of love, I would have to face the fact that my father had chosen to die rather than stay with me." His voice cracked. "It was easier to pretend I didn't care about anyone. Easier to keep everyone at a distance, including me. Especially you." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "You terrified me from the moment we met. I looked at you, and I felt something I had spent my whole life trying to avoid. So I pushed you away. I hurt you before you could hurt me." Maren's eyes filled with tears. "You succeeded. I know, and I will never forgive myself for it." They talked about everything except the past for days after that, until one evening, a week before the baby was due, when she could no longer avoid it. They were sitting in the cottage, Fenella having tactfully retreated to visit Maeve. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "I need to know something," Marin said quietly, "and I need you to tell me the truth." "Ask." "Ottilie, was she the only one, or were there others?" The question had haunted her for years. She needed to know the truth, however painful. Aldrich was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "There were others. 6, over 3 years." He met her eyes. "I won't insult you by claiming they meant nothing. At the time, I told myself they were distractions, meaningless encounters that helped me avoid thinking about my own emptiness. But that doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses it. Why wasn't I enough? You were more than enough. That was the problem." He ran a hand through his hair. "Every time I looked at you, I felt something terrifying. So I drowned it out with women who made me feel nothing. That doesn't make sense. None of it made sense. I was broken long before I met you. Broken by watching my father wither away after losing my mother. Broken by a grandmother who taught me that love was weakness." He stood, pacing the small room. "None of that is an excuse, but it's the truth of who I was. And now? Now I know that I love you, that I have loved you since our wedding day, when you walked toward me in that church and I felt my heart stop. That I was so afraid of losing you, that I pushed you away before you could leave. You hurt me. I know, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life." Marin's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted so badly to be enough for you. I tried everything. I learned your favorite foods, studied the topics you cared about, dressed in colors I thought you'd like. And it made no difference. You still looked through me." Aldrich crossed the room, lowering himself beside her chair, his hands finding hers. "You were always enough, more than enough. The failure was mine, not yours." His voice trembled. "I was so afraid of losing you that I pushed you away before you could leave. And then you left anyway, and I understood what I had done." The tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "You don't have to forgive me. Not today, not ever, if that's what you need." He raised her hands to his lips. "But know this. I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, whether you take me back or not." Marin looked at him through her tears, at the man who had been her husband, and her jailer, and her tormentor, at the man who was now offering everything he had, without asking for anything in return. She did not know if she could trust him. She did not know if the wounds would ever fully heal. But she knew in that moment that she loved him, had always loved him, even when it hurt. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay with me tonight. Not as my husband. Just stay." He rose and settled beside her on the cot, wrapping his arms around her carefully, mindful of her swollen belly. They stayed that way through the long night, neither sleeping, neither speaking. Simply existing together in a way they never had during their marriage. And somewhere in those quiet hours, something that had been broken began to heal. The baby came on a March morning when the first signs of spring were beginning to soften the harsh coastal landscape. Marin's labor started at dawn. Fenella sent Aldrich to the village for the midwife, and he went without argument, though his face was pale with terror. "He'll wear a hole in the floor of that tavern," Fenella said dryly, as she helped Marin through the first contractions. "Never seen a man so terrified. He's not supposed to be here. Men don't stay for births." He refused to leave the village, said he wasn't going to miss another moment of your life. The labor was long and hard, hours of pain that built and receded like waves. The midwife, a capable woman named Geta, who had delivered half the children in Renford, declared everything normal. But normal did not mean easy. Maren had thought she understood pain, the pain of rejection, of invisibility, of watching her husband choose other women while she faded into the wallpaper. But this was something different entirely. This was her body tearing itself apart to bring new life into the world. Between contractions, she gripped Fenella's hand and tried to breathe. She focused on the ceiling beams, counting the knots in the wood, trying to find patterns in the grain. Anything to distract from the waves of agony that crashed over her again and again. Aldrich stayed by her side through the long hours, holding her other hand when the contractions came, wiping her forehead with cool cloths. His face was pale, his eyes wild with helpless terror. He had never done anything like this before, had probably never been in the same room as a laboring woman. Men of his class were supposed to pace in distant drawing rooms, waiting for news. But he stayed. "You don't have to be here," Maren gasped between contractions. "Yes, I do." His voice was steady, even though his face was pale. "I've missed too much already. I'm not missing this." "It's not—" Another contraction seized her, and she cried out, gripping his hand so hard she felt the bones shift. "It's not proper." "I don't care about proper. I care about you." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "I care about being here, about being present, about finally showing up when it matters." By late afternoon, Maren was exhausted. Her body had been working for hours, pushing toward a goal that seemed impossibly distant. She gripped Fenella's hand and pushed when Geta told her to push, her entire being focused on this single overwhelming effort. "I love you," Aldrich whispered as another contraction crested. "I love you, and I'm so sorry for everything. And you can hate me forever. But please, please come through this. Both of you. Please." She did not have the breath to respond, but she squeezed his hand, and she did not let go. And then, as the sun began to set over the sea, her daughter was born. The cry that filled the cottage was the most beautiful sound Maren had ever heard. Geta placed the baby on her chest, and Maren wept with joy and overwhelming love. "A girl," Geta announced, "healthy and strong. A girl. Not the heir Aldrich needed. Not the son the Ashford legacy demanded." Maren looked at her daughter's face, at the tiny features already so perfect, and felt a protective love unlike anything she had ever experienced. This child would be loved. This child would be free. The door opened, and Aldrich appeared in the threshold. He had clearly been pacing for hours. His hair was disheveled, his coat abandoned somewhere. He looked wild and desperate and terrified. Then he saw the baby. His face transformed. The fear melted away, replaced by something raw and overwhelming. He crossed the room slowly, as if approaching something sacred, and lowered himself beside Maren's cot. "A daughter," she said softly. "A daughter." His voice was scarcely audible. He reached out one trembling finger to touch the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around it instinctively. Tears streamed down his face. "She's perfect," he said. "She's absolutely perfect. Your grandmother will be disappointed. My grandmother can go to hell." The words came out soft, but resolute. "This is our daughter, our family. Nothing and no one will ever hurt her. I swear it on my life." He looked at Maren, and she saw in his eyes everything she had been waiting for. Not the cold duke who had looked through her for 3 years. Just a man. A father. Someone who had finally learned what mattered. "Tell me what I need to do. Tell me how to make this right." "Your grandmother cannot be part of our daughter's life. Not at all." "Agreed. She'll be banished from Stormwick before we return. Our daughter inherits everything. The title passes through her. I'll have the lawyers draft the papers tomorrow. No one will be able to take what's hers. And when we return to London, You will acknowledge your failures publicly." He did not hesitate. "Done." "Her name," she said softly, "will be Verity, because she represents the truth we finally found." Aldrich reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "Verity," he repeated. "It's perfect." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, a kiss that asked nothing and promised everything. And in the small cottage at the edge of the sea, a family was born. 6 months later, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford returned to London. The scandal that erupted was everything Marin had anticipated. Society had believed her dead, had mourned her with appropriate insincerity, had already begun placing bets on who the Duke would marry next. Her reappearance, alive and well, and carrying an infant daughter, detonated like a bomb in the glittering ballrooms of the Ton. But the true scandal came at the Harrington Ball, 3 weeks after their return. It was the event of the season, every important family in attendance. When the Duke and Duchess of Ashford were announced, the room fell silent. Marin descended the stairs on Aldrich's arm, wearing a gown of deep crimson silk that made her look like a queen. She was no longer the pale, invisible woman who had vanished nearly a year ago. The sea air and hard work and happiness had transformed her into someone radiant. Aldrich looked at her the way he had never looked at her during their marriage, with pride, with adoration. They had barely reached the bottom of the stairs when Lady Cecilia Hartwood materialized before them. "Your Grace, we had heard you were returned from the dead. How delightfully dramatic. Do tell us where you've been all these months." The question was a trap. Whatever answer Marin gave would be dissected and spread across every drawing room in London. But before she could respond, Aldrich spoke. "My wife has been recovering from the cruelty I inflicted upon her." The ballroom went absolutely silent. "I beg your pardon?" Lady Cecilia's smile froze. "You heard me." Aldrich's voice carried across the room, clear and unflinching. "For 3 years of our marriage, I was a faithless, neglectful, cruel husband. I took mistresses and paraded them before my wife. I allowed my grandmother to treat her with contempt. I made her feel invisible in her own home." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented. Dukes did not confess their sins in public. 7 months ago, my wife left me, not because she was weak or unstable. She left because I gave her no other choice, because I had made her life unbearable, and she had the courage to escape. Marin watched the faces around them. Shock, disbelief, and from some of the women, something like recognition. "She returned," Aldrich continued, "not because I deserved her forgiveness, but because she chose to give me a chance to become better. And I intend to spend the rest of my life earning that chance." He looked at Marin. "My wife is the strongest person I have ever known. If anyone in this room speaks ill of her, they will answer to me." The silence stretched. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was Lady Pemberton, an elderly countess known for her unflinching honesty. She rose from her chair, applauding steadily. "Well said. About time one of you young fools admitted the truth." Others began to join her. Not everyone. Some faces remained cold and scandalized. The Dowager Duchess, standing in the corner, looked as if she had swallowed poison. But enough people were clapping that it became a wave, spreading across the ballroom until the applause was deafening. Marin turned to her husband, tears streaming down her face. "You actually did it. I told you I would." He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "I told you I would do whatever it takes." They danced that night, surrounded by whispers and speculation, and the beginning of a new reputation. The Duke who had confessed, the Duchess who had escaped and returned victorious. When the music ended, they stood together at the edge of the ballroom, watching the swirl of silk and candlelight. Other couples moved past them, some nodding respectfully, others still wearing expressions of scandalized disbelief. "They'll be talking about this for years," Marin said quietly. "Good. Let them talk. Let them remember that even a duke can be wrong, and even a duchess can walk away." She looked up at him, at this man who had humiliated himself before all of society for her sake. "Why did you do it? You could have said something vague, something that protected your reputation." "Because you asked me to, and because it was true." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Because our daughter will grow up in a world that tells her she is less than she is. And I want her to know that her father was willing to face the truth, no matter how painful. I want her to know that honesty matters more than reputation." Marin felt tears prick her eyes again. "The man I married would never have said that. The man you married was a coward who didn't deserve you. I'm trying to become someone who does." They left the ball early, slipping out through a side entrance to avoid the crush of carriages at the front. The night air was cool and clean after the heat of the ballroom. In the carriage, Aldrich took her hand. "I know this doesn't fix everything. I know there will be difficult days ahead. But I want you to know that I meant every word I said in there. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the chance you've given me." Marin squeezed his hand. "I know, and I want you to know that I'm not sorry I came back. Whatever happens next, I'm not sorry." The carriage rolled through the London streets, carrying them toward a future that neither of them could have imagined a year ago. A future built not on fairy tales, but on something harder and more real. On truth and effort, and the daily choice to love even when it was difficult. The years that followed were not always easy. Trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt. There were nights when Marin woke from nightmares of the dark years, nights when old wounds ached unexpectedly. There were arguments and misunderstandings, and moments when the weight of the past seemed unbearable. But they kept going. They kept choosing each other, day after day, in all the small ways that mattered. Aldrich learned to be present, to listen, to see her. Marin learned to trust again, to believe that people could change. Their marriage was never the fairy tale she had imagined at 19. It was something harder and more real. A partnership forged in fire and tested by time. Verity grew from a baby to a child, to a young woman who inherited her mother's strength and her father's intelligence, and a spirit entirely her own. The Dowager Duchess had been banished to a distant property within a year of their return. She lived there still, bitter and alone, forbidden from contact with her great-granddaughter. The Ashford legacy of cruelty had ended with her. Verity inherited the title at 23, becoming the first female Duke of Ashford. Parliament had argued about it for years, traditionalists insisting that the title could only pass through the male line, reformers pointing to precedents from other noble houses. But Aldrich had wielded his influence ruthlessly, calling in every favor he possessed, threatening and cajoling, and refusing to accept defeat, until the succession was legally unassailable. The day the final papers were signed, Verity found her father in his study, staring at the documents with tears in his eyes. "You did that for me," she said. "I did that for the future," Aldrich replied, "so that no daughter of this family would ever be treated as less than she deserved, so that no woman would ever have to run away in the night because she had no power, no voice, no choice. Mother told me the story about how she left and how you found her. Did she tell you what I was like before? The man I used to be?" "Yes." Aldrich nodded slowly. "Good. You should know. You should know what I was capable of, so you can recognize those patterns if you ever see them in anyone else. so you can protect yourself." Verity crossed the room and embraced him. "You're not that man anymore, Father." "No, but I was. And I never want you to forget that people can change, but they have to choose it. Every day, they have to choose it." Verity grew up watching her parents navigate their complicated relationship. She saw the way her father looked at her mother, with wonder and gratitude and something like reverence. She saw the way her mother held her ground, refusing to diminish herself for anyone, speaking her mind even when it was uncomfortable. She learned from both of them. "You could have given up on him," Verity said once, when she was old enough to understand their history. "After everything he did." "Why didn't you?" Marin considered the question carefully. "Because I saw who he could be. Because he was willing to do the work. Because somewhere under all that armor, there was someone worth loving." She paused. "And because I loved him, even when it hurt, even when it seemed impossible." "Was it worth it?" Marin looked across the garden to where Aldrich was playing with their grandchildren, his face alight with joy. The cold Duke who had once made her feel invisible was nowhere to be found. In his place was a man who had learned to love, imperfectly, but wholly. "Yes," she said. "It was worth it." On their 20th wedding anniversary, Marin and Aldrich returned to Renford. The journey north felt different this time. No more hiding, no more fear. They traveled openly in a fine carriage, stopping at comfortable inns, and everywhere they went, people treated them with the respect due their station. But Marin found herself missing the simplicity of that first journey, when she had been no one, when she had been free. The cottage still stood at the edge of the cliff, exactly as she remembered it. The thatched roof had been replaced with slate, and the garden was overgrown, but the bones of the place remained. Fenella had passed away peacefully 5 years before, in her sleep, with Marin holding her hand. She had left the cottage to Marin in her will, along with a letter that Marin still kept in her jewelry box. "You were the daughter I should have saved," the letter read. "You and Verity gave me a reason to believe that things could be different. Thank you for that gift." Marin had kept the cottage exactly as it was, a memorial to the woman who had saved her when she had no one else. She paid a local family to maintain it, and she returned every few years to walk the cliff paths and remember. They walked the familiar route together now, as they had done so many times during those strange months of testing and rebuilding. The sea crashed against the rocks below, unchanged after 20 years. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries carrying on the wind. "This is where I fell in love with you," Aldrich said quietly. "The real you. Not the quiet Duchess I had ignored for 3 years, but the woman who had the courage to run, the strength to survive, the grace to give me another chance I didn't deserve. This is where I learned that I was worth loving." Marin squeezed his hand. "Not because of a title or a duty, not because I was useful or decorative, just because of who I am. You were always worth loving. I was just too blind to see it. And now I see you. Every day I see you. And every day I fall in love with you all over again." They stood together at the edge of the world, looking out at the endless sea. Behind them, their past stretched long and complicated, full of pain and betrayal and the slow, hard work of healing. Before them, the future opened wide and full of possibility. The wind carried the smell of salt and wildflowers. Somewhere in the village, a church bell was ringing. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, "coming back to me, giving me that chance?" Marin considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. There were still moments when old wounds ached, when echoes of the bad years surfaced unexpectedly. There were still nights when she woke from dreams of that cold house, of empty corridors and dismissive glances, and the sound of Otilia's laughter behind closed doors. But those moments were fewer now. The good days far outnumbered the bad, and the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had somehow survived everything they had done to destroy it, that was real. That was worth every painful step of the journey. "I regret the years we lost," she said finally. "I regret the pain we both went through. I regret that it took something as drastic as me disappearing for either of us to face the truth." She paused, looking out at the sea that had witnessed so much of their story. But coming back, giving you that chance, believing that people could change. She turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "That I will never regret, because look at us now. Look at who we've become." He kissed her there, on the cliff path where their real story had begun. Not the story of a duke and a purchased bride, but the story of two broken people who had somehow found their way back to each other, who had learned that love was not a fairy tale, but a choice, made again and again, in all the small moments that added up to a lifetime. And when they finally returned to the cottage, hand in hand, the setting sun painted the sea gold and crimson, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and the gulls wheeled overhead, and life was very good. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that fights for redemption over perfection, in characters who learn, who grow, who earn their happiness through struggle and change, in endings that feel true because they were won, not simply given. Your presence here makes this space what it is. Every moment you spend with these characters matters to me. Do you have a favorite scene or line from this story? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what resonates, what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more stories of love, tested by fire and proven by time. Thank you for being here. Until next time.